free. I have seen the way my sin had crucified my King. It hung him there, yet still he thought of me. His life exchanged so I could be redeemed. It is finished. It is done. Death defeated. Christ has won. It is finished. Praise the Son, glorious and risen one. I have seen the grave defeated by the risen King. I know my God is fighting still for me. The empty tomb is now my victory. Whoa, whoa. Oh, it is finished. It is done. Death defeated. Christ has won. It is finished. Praise the Son, glorious and risen one. Oh, it is finished. It is done. Death defeated. Christ has won. It is finished. Praise the Son, glorious and risen one. Alleluia. It is done. Alleluia. Alleluia. It is done.
Well, hello everybody. I trust you had a Merry Christmas with the people that you care about most. And with this video, we have reached the final trip into the Bible for 2020, which is pretty wild. You will notice that this is a little bit of a different setup. You might recognize the backdrop, but There'll be no 2-camera stuff going on. It is just me self-recording today. And the whole idea of this day was to give our incredible team, our incredible staff, especially those who work with media and technology and troubleshooting, the incredible pivot that's been pulled off to a mostly digital reality this year, to give all those people, staff and volunteers, a huge break. So if you know Jake Campbell, if you know Zach Hendricks, if you know Stefan Garcia, rejoice that they are getting a well-deserved day off. And if you know them, by all means, show them some love on social media or a text message or a call or however you want to get in touch with them. But show the love that is well-deserved there. So this is going to be it. This is going to be our final jump into the scriptures for the year. And it is fitting that we are finishing the end of chapter 16. Last trip to chapter 16 of the Gospel of John. Last sermon in this extended series called Take Heart, which is just all about Jesus preparing his disciples for the hardship to come in the final hours of his life. And we have seen time and time again this year, but especially this last month and a half, the words of Jesus as recorded by John in the Gospel of John in these chapters 15 and 16 prove prophetic and timely for us as a church family and for many of us as individuals in this precise moment. And I'm confident that these last few verses are going to meet you precisely where you are these last few days, last few hours of 2020. And so with that in mind, we're going to do this. We're going to finish chapter 16. I'm going to cheat back a verse to chapter 28, which Pastor Nick covered last week. But this is John 16, starting in verse 28, and just these last few verses of the chapter. It says this. I came from the Father, and I have come into the world. Again, I am leaving the world and going to the Father. His disciples said, look, now you're speaking plainly and not using any figurative language. Now we know that you know everything, and you don't need anyone to question you. By this we believe that you came from God. Jesus responded to them, do you now believe? Indeed, an hour is coming and has come when each of you will be scattered to his own home, and you will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. And now the home run verse. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. You will have suffering in this world, but be courageous. I have conquered the world. This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. And everybody said together, amen. So if you're taking notes, why don't we just call this one what it should be called? Take heart, I have overcome the world. Take heart, I have overcome the world. If you want to title it more accurately, why don't you put, He has overcome the world. Our final and our most powerful example of why we can take heart in this series, in this season, and in this life. He has overcome the world. We will get to that verse in just a moment. The perfect verse to end a year like this one. Let's just take this quick walk through these verses and let the word speak for itself. In verse 29, his disciples say, look now, you're speaking plainly, not just using figurative language. Now we know that you know everything, and we don't need anyone to question you. By this, we believe that you came from God. Now, notice that they're basically saying that they think they've arrived. We get it now. Because you've spoken this explicitly, I've come from the Father. Right? It's a very Christmassy verse. I have come from the Father. I have arrived. I've lived for 30 years. I've lived the perfect life you couldn't live. And stay tuned because the important stuff is about to happen. He says, I came from the Father. I'm going back to the Father. He says it explicitly, no metaphor. And they say, we get it now. We've finally arrived. We get it. We believe. We're all in. But also recognize where that confidence is coming from. They say, now we know. So the confidence that they have is from information that they have heard and processed and apparently believed in, but it's more than that. The faith-filled life is more than that. We need more than just the right information. And I think I'm speaking on behalf of everybody right now when I say that all of us have spent time shouting questions into the sky this year. And answers alone, as much as you might like answers alone would not be sufficient to guide you into a place of peace if you feel like you're in a place of turbulence and hardship right now. They say, by this we believe. Now we know, and by this we believe. Now this is a good process. You need to know the gospel so you can believe the gospel, believe in Jesus and who he is, and allow that to change your everything. That's not a bad progression. We understand, so now we believe is good. But again, it's not that simple. And watch how Jesus responds to them as they say, hey, now we know this, therefore we believe. We get it, we've arrived. Jesus corrects them. Look at verse 31. Jesus responded to them, do you now believe? He's parenthetically saying, do you? Are you sure? Now, could it be that he's not calling their faith into question? He's not calling their belief into question, although it could be that. But is it possible that rather that their expectations of what life after faith and belief should look like? Is it possible he's questioning those things? Because if we've learned anything about the disciples, we've learned that they did have these interesting expectations of who Jesus was supposed to be and what their lives would look like as Jesus's inner circle. They foresaw personal power. They foresaw military conquest over Rome. They foresaw perks and benefits. They probably foresaw we're the governors, we're the people of power, we're living lavishly. Who knows what they perhaps assumed was coming. But if those were their expectations, it certainly seems like Jesus enlightens them, and enlightening them, he enlightens us. What were they expecting? And what do we expect? Comes along with a life of faith in Jesus. If we're expecting total comfort, if we're expecting a pain-free reality, if we're expecting a doubt-free reality, he's quick to put us in our place because he loves us. Look at verse 32. Indeed, an hour is coming and has come when each of you will be scattered to his own home, and you will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone because the Father is with me. Jesus is explicitly predicting the events that we will see unfold in chapter 17, 18, and beyond, which is Jesus is going to be arrested and eventually tortured and killed. But at the moment of his arrest, a scattering will happen, and all the 11 remaining disciples will scatter. They will leave Jesus. They will leave the one that they say that they now know to be the Messiah and that they believe to be the most important thing in their lives. They will scatter and they will run in fear, out of fear of being associated with him and potentially meeting the same fate that he would meet. Now, the scattering that's described in this verse is twofold. One, they scatter from each other, right? He says, you are going to scatter each to his own home. And then two, it's from Jesus himself. You will leave me alone. And can I say that scattering from Jesus and scattering from the people of Jesus, the church of God, those two things together are always a deadly combination, a deadly combo to faith and belief, especially the newly found variety of those things. And this, perhaps you haven't put your finger on it, but there's a good chance you have. Christian, this has been the greatest threat to your well-being in a pandemic year that endures, right? Is scattering and separation from the people of God and then from Jesus himself. And if those two things have characterized your reality, you're likely experiencing a lot of hurt and a lot of fear and a lot of doubt right now. And everything we can do needs to be done to remedy those things, for you to feel some sense of connection to the people of God, even though it's challenging, and especially to feel a sense of connection to Jesus himself, because that twofold scattering is a difficult, alarming thing that he's foretold. We go to verse 33. It says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. I've told you these things. What's he referring to? What things? Well, he has foretold the scattering, so he's certainly referring to that. And before he talked about that scattering, he talked about suffering a couple paragraphs ago. preparing the disciples for that. Before that, chapter 15, he talked about abiding, and I still believe he's talking about that because it's all on the same walk on the way to the Garden of Gethsemane that this exchange happens. So he foretells the scattering, the suffering, the abiding. He does all of this. So why? So that we may have something in him. Some things, plural, actually. The last paragraph before what we're looking at right here was all about joy. The word joy just kept popping up, exploding all over the page, that he wants fullness and complete joy for those who will follow him. But here he pivots. What's he talk about now? He says, I've told you all these things so that you may have peace. Another Christmas word, joy and peace. That in telling the disciples these things in these verses, he's trying to give them access to the fullness of peace. He's doing the same thing for you right now. It's quite fitting to see these Christmas words flying around. And peace is no stranger, the word itself, to the scriptures. This is the New Testament, not written in Hebrew, but it is certainly the New Testament equivalent of the Hebrew word shalom, which is not just the absence of war or the presence of a fruity drink in our hand as we swing in a Hawaiian breeze, whatever your picture of peace is. No, shalom implies abundance. It implies completeness. It implies the desired state of every human, a state that's only possible through God, who is the author of peace, and his son Jesus, who is the Prince of Peace. Now we go to the next part of verse 33. It pivots. It says, you will have suffering in this world. Jesus says that to his original listeners, those disciples. You will have suffering in this world. Perhaps your attachment to me, Jesus, has led you to believe that you won't, but you will. You will have suffering in this world. And that's a word that doesn't sound like the kind of word you would want heading into a new year, where we desire a fresh start. But it might be exactly what we need to hear. It might be the very thing a loving God would say to us and start to tell us, you will have suffering in this world. Hear me, guys. Hear me. I believe in fresh starts. I believe in new beginnings. I believe in clear goals and bold prayers and everything that tends to come with January 1. But I need you to know that the world of early 2021 is going to look and feel a whole lot like the world of late 2020. That's just a fact. The objective reality will look very similar on January 1st at 1 a.m. as it does at 11:59 p.m. on December 31st. Our hope is not in a turning of the page, metaphorically. Our hope is not in the turning of the page on a calendar. Our hope is the one who's like the author of time itself. And this God says to us, you will have suffering in this world. Guys, there's still going to be disease. There's still going to be disunity. There's still going to be discouragement. There's still going to be destruction. There's still going to be death, at least for a while. But the hope that comes next is that the suffering will not have the final word. The suffering doesn't get the final word in John 16. The suffering doesn't get the final word on December 31st as we close the chapter on the year 2020. No. He has saved the most potent, game-changing, paradigm-shifting words for last in this series and in this year. It's the last part of verse 33. Be courageous. Be courageous. Some translations say, take heart. It's the namesake of the series we've been in for nearly 2 months. Be courageous. There will be suffering, but be courageous. There will be suffering, but don't surrender to fear. Be courageous. Take heart. This is the equivalent of the same thing in the Old Testament that God speaks to Joshua before he enters the promised land. Be courageous. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you forever and ever, wherever you go. Jesus has just said the exact same thing. Absolutely. But there's more to it. that promise to Joshua, don't be scared, be courageous because I'll always be with you. Jesus has already promised that in John 16. So we have that same promise, that same reason to not be courageous, because Jesus, the Prince of Peace, God himself, will be with us no matter what the new year holds. No matter what suffering sticks around, or no matter what new suffering comes into view, we will not be alone. But there's something greater waiting for us at the end of this verse. Be courageous. Why? Because I have conquered the world, says Jesus. I have conquered the world. Christian, you should take heart. You should be courageous in this moment, in this season, regardless of what you face. You should take heart. You should be courageous, not because you're great, but because he is great. He's great, and he has conquered the world. That's what Jesus says in John 16:33, a few chapters before he actually dies for the sin of the world. A few chapters before he rises to new life and conquers death and conquers pain and conquers sin, all of that. He says, I have conquered the world, before he carries out the events that actually seal the deal on that sentiment. That phrase has some serious swagger, because he says it in the past tense before he actually sees it through. He declares an ultimate future tense reality as a present tense certainty, and says that is why you can be courageous. That is why peace is being made available to you. The fact that it hasn't actually happened in space and time for you right now, which are really just formalities for me, nothing but a formality. That much certainty, that much power. I have conquered the world. That's why you can be courageous. That's where your hope is. That the things of the world that mark the world away from God, darkness and evil and pain and suffering, Jesus has a plan for those things, and he sees it through. His death and his resurrection come to pass in the days that followed these words being spoken. We take heart because Jesus has conquered. We take heart because death is not an undefeated juggernaut. Jesus defeated death. We take heart because Satan is a wounded, defeated, condemned enemy. We take heart because sin, although lethal, has a permanent antidote in the gospel of Jesus Christ. We take heart because the conqueror loves us. The conqueror who loves us, who calls us family, is ever present before us, ever present beside us, and ever present within us. We take heart because of these things. We be courageous because of these things. And that same conqueror has promised that though there will be physical suffering for a while and doubtful scattering at times, he will never quit. He will never leave. We take heart because Jesus has conquered. And secondly, we take heart because of how he has conquered. Not through military conquest, but through a conquest of sacrificial love. And how has he conquered? He's conquered in a way that invites us into the ripple effects of this conquest of love. We have been invited into what he is still doing in the world, carrying joy and peace and hope and healing into every nook and cranny of creation and humanity. My friends, I want this sentiment that we can take heart, that we can be courageous, and be courageous for ourselves and be courageous for those around us because of who Jesus is and what he has done. I want us to take that invitation to be a part of that conquest of love seriously these last few days of 2020, and especially as we step into this new year together. At Reach, the Reach family in 2021 and beyond is going to be focusing on specific things to make sure that we are playing our role in what God has invited us into. We will know we are playing our role in what Jesus, the great conqueror, has done and is still doing. We will know we are playing our role well when 5 things are happening. And these 5 things are going to be a focal point for us as a church at the highest level. And we want them to be on your mind as we finish this year and step into the new year. We will know we're playing our role well when people are being saved, when disciples are being made, when leaders are being trained, when cities are being served, and when churches are being planted to go and do the same. People saved, disciples made, leaders trained, cities served, and churches planted. What does it mean to be a part of what God's doing in the world? We think those 5 things. How do we know when we're being faithful to play our role as a local church family when those 5 things are happening? What can you expect in 2021? The pursuit of those 5 things together. And admitting that we have some work to do to become proficient and excellent in some of these things, to be faithful more than anything else. And we're going to do those things. We're going to take steps to see those 5 things become so very true of our church community. And it's on all of us to pray to that end for our church as a whole. And it's on each of us to ask ourselves, where is God asking me to take steps forward to be a part of what he wants to do in the world? How does he want to use me as an individual to carry hope and healing to those who need it in 2021 and in the years that follow? So right now, here's your response, your call to response, your last call to response for 2021 and these final hours that we have together in 2020. First, I want you to stare down the year to come. And I want you to do a counterintuitive thing, especially for this time of year. I want you to accept that there is more hardship ahead. In our story as a church, in our story as a country, in your story personally, there is certainly more hardship ahead. There just is, because there's still air in your lungs. You're not home yet. You're not in heaven yet. There's more hardship ahead. I want you to stare that down and accept that. And then I want you to prayerfully and actively take heart. Prayerfully and actively choose courage. Not out of some new resource you found within yourself, but because the conqueror will be with you. In fact, he's already there in 2021. He's already there. He's not just in the new year. He's there waiting, already orchestrating things for us to play our role. And my friends, I want you to receive the peace that comes from, not from avoiding the hard stuff, but from knowing the one who reigns over and will one day eliminate the hard stuff, the suffering, the pain. And dedicate your everything to passing that peace along to others. Family, would you receive this blessing as our final corporate act of worship together this year? May the God who has conquered all the things you are scared of already, may the knowledge of that God give you a peculiar peace and a peculiar confidence as you courageously look to the hardship that lies ahead. And may you come to believe that in the midst of that hardship, you will not be alone, and that in that hardship, you will find purpose you did not see coming, and opportunities to love and serve that you never could have anticipated. May you be filled with hope, not because of a number changing on a calendar, but because the God who adores you will be with you every step of the way. And may that change everything for you. My friends, I've never been more honored to be your pastor, and I'm truly excited to be with you again in 2021. And until that happens, would you please do what we always do? May you be the church and reach the city.